If you're a renter in Canada, do you know if your landlord is a Canadian citizen or a non-resident? Well, it turns out that that's extremely important to know because you don't want to end up like the individual in Montreal who got assessed an over $80,000 tax bill because the landlord was a non-resident. You might be wondering, how could this even happen? That was definitely the first thought that crossed my mind when I saw this situation, especially due to the fact that there are so many protections for tenants in place across Canada and especially in certain provinces such as BC. Now, the situation that I'm going to be looking into further today occurred in Montreal, Quebec, but the rules that impacted this individual are applicable to the entire country. So you're going to want to pay attention. So I'm now going to share my screen and go over the article that was first published and brought this to the attention of the public. So, Montreal tenant forced to pay his landlord's taxes and offers advice to other renters. David Cisco has some advice for fellow renters across the country. Get proof that your landlord is paying their taxes, or at least make sure you've got a property manager who's responsible. Mr. Cisco is the Montreal tenant who was audited and assessed by the CRA in 2018 in order to pay 6 years worth of his non-resident landlord's withholding taxes, as reported recently by the Globe and Mail. Mr. Cisco says he did not know that his landlady was a non-resident. He also didn't know that tenants renting from a non-resident are required to withhold and remit 25% of their rent to CRA each month unless they have a property manager doing it for them or if the non-resident has made alternate arrangements to pay their taxes. So again, when I first heard this, I thought it was absolutely insane. We have something somewhat similar to this when you are selling a property and it is a non-resident who is selling, but this is generally dealt with by the lawyers just to ensure that there is enough money left over after the sale proceeds in order to pay off the taxes that are required by that selling individual. However, this is a very different situation with a tenant and a landlord, and the numbers that you're going to see here are quite astonishing. So we'll move on to that because the first time I heard them, it absolutely blew my mind. So because the CRA was unable to collect from the overseas landlord, Cisco was then assessed for unpaid withholding taxes as well as compounded interest and penalties that added up to over $80,000. Over $80,000, that's insane. And this was in March of 2023, and he took the Minister of National Revenue to tax court and he lost. So he actually took action on this and lost. And so the only break he was given was a reduction in the number of years he was owed for from 6 to 3 months. And he says he now owes around $43,000. So the good news is it was reduced from over $80,000 to $43,000, still an astonishing number, although he believes more interest and penalties have since accrued since the publishing of this article. And he's also paid nearly double that amount in accounting and legal fees. So the big thing here is not everybody has the funds in order to actually go through the process of paying for these accounting and legal fees in order to further look into this. So somebody else in this situation wouldn't even have been afforded the opportunity to do so. So lucky that it sounds like this guy is probably in a decent financial situation to be able to afford those bills, or he's doing it on credit, who really knows? But at the end of the day, most people are not able to afford this. And so Mr. Cisco and his wife are paying nearly $3,000 a month in rent at 501-4175 Rue St. Catherine West in Westmont, Quebec, an enclave of Montreal. Mr. Cisco is a 1988 Canadian Olympic athlete and two-time Taekwondo champion who owns a gym. So the 61-year-old said he still hasn't settled the debt with CRA, and his lawyer told him that it's unlikely they'll be willing to negotiate. So sounds like he's done as much as he possibly could, brought that payment down, but just still absolutely insane here. And so the information of the landlady was not shared as advised by counsel. However, after the Cisco family moved out, they learned that the former landlady had put the condo on the market, and Mr. Cisco notified the CRA that they had an opportunity to collect the taxes she owed, I'm assuming from the proceeds of the sales. However, he never found out if they actually tried. So as mentioned, upon the sale of a home, there are certain taxes that are applicable to non-residents of Canada, and a lot of the time they will collect it during this time period. So in the court documents, Mr. Cisco argued that his landlord had given a Canadian address on the deed of sale. When she purchased the unit, she had a Canadian social insurance number, and his rent checks were going to a TD account in Montreal. Also in the court documents, the CR provided evidence that showed the landlord hadn't filed income tax returns. She didn't have any links to property in Canada other than the rental unit. Her phone number in the lease was an Italian phone number. She had used an Italian email address to correspond with Mr. 𝐁𝐨𝐤, and she had told the CRA auditor that she lived in Italy. So the withholding tax has been around for decades. The problem for tenants arises when a non-resident landlord doesn't pay. And non-resident owned properties represent a substantial share of secondary rental market in Canada. Considering the risk to tenants amid a housing crisis, Mr. 𝐁𝐶 wonders why the CRA didn't put a lien against the rental property or at least act to collect on the debt when the property sold. So this makes a lot of sense to me. Unfortunately, I don't know why the CRA makes basically all of our lives a lot harder. It's like, we know what you owe in taxes, but we're not going to tell you, and then we're going to force you to file it. But if you're wrong, we're going to come after you. I digress. That's a whole other conversation, but there is definitely some outdated practices with the tax systems here in Canada that could definitely be improved. Moving on. Mr. 𝐁𝐶's lawyer, Mr. Liu, says that all the CRA must do is establish liability to collect on the debt. And he said there doesn't appear to be a guideline on how they do that. Again, there's a lot of things that are unclear, but I digress. Whether the CRA should have collected the rent in some other ways does not impact his liability under the law. The CRA and tax court have to apply the law as it is written. That's why if we want any meaningful change, we need to change the law, and it's for the Department of Finance to intervene. And when brought up with Caroline 𝐕𝐢𝐬𝐬, sorry, I probably butchered that name, Deputy Spokesperson and Media Relations Manager of the Department of Finance, said that the requirement for renters help to ensure CRA obtains information on rental income non-residents might be earning in Canada. It also helps facilitate collection of resulting tax, she said. This does not cost renters anything, said Ms. 𝐕𝐢𝐬𝐬, adding that it is a standard practice. A CRA spokesperson in an email that they encourage non-resident landlords to hire property managers. Otherwise, tenants are required to withhold the amount and fill out a form NR4. So if the non-resident fails to remit, the tenant is responsible for the full amount, said the statement. The CRA's practice to make every effort to assess the non-resident owner rather than the individual tenant. So once again, it's pretty crazy for them to expect that people would just know this without realistically providing much education on the topic. I personally haven't seen it in the past before, or at least it hasn't been brought into the media's attention. So to prevent Mr. 𝐁𝐶's situation, he suggests a system whereby CRA is notified of any non-tax resident real estate purchases. At that point, CRA would send the purchaser notice of tax obligations and issue an individual tax number if they don't qualify for a social insurance number. Mr. 𝐁𝐶 said he is doing his best not to dwell on the situation, but he wants Canadian renters to beware, and completely understandable. However, more recently, I actually came across another article, and we're gonna dive into that one now, and it comes with a bit of a twist. So I recently came across this article that states tenants don't have to foot unpaid bills for foreign landlords from the minister. So this kind of contradicts what we were reading. The CRA will not go after tenants for tax owed by their landlords living out of country, according to a statement from the Minister of National Revenue. Already seems to be contradicting what was happening. This guy was going through this situation since 2018, so why wasn't it dealt with earlier? Well, we'll have to find out. The clarification comes after confusion swirled online this week about whether a tenant is responsible for withholding taxes paid on rent to their landlord if the property is owned by someone outside of Canada. This is addressing the article we just read. So statement from the minister: I want to reassure Canadians that the CRA does not intend to collect any portion of any non-resident landlord's unpaid taxes from individual tenants, and that it is incorrect to state otherwise. However, based on the situation we just read about, they did not make Mr. 𝐁𝐶's life very easy, and my assumption is because it got enough media attention, that's the only reason it was addressed. Unfortunately, sometimes that's what needs to happen in order for there to be some sort of change, but it doesn't sound like they were willing to come to terms with him, as it already said that he had already gone to court over the issue and they were not willing to drop the charges. So assertions that renters should be responsible for their landlord's unpaid taxes, or that a tenant should withhold 25% of their rent up front and remit the taxes directly to CRA, came in response to a tax court ruling last year. And so they stated that this was an extremely rare situation, And the case law and its possible implications for renters were first reported widely on the Globe and Mail last year. As you saw, the article described a Montreal man ordered to pay 6 worths of unpaid taxes plus interest on behalf of his landlord on a decision that was held up in the tax court. So this past week, debate over the legitimacy of the law and on putting the onus on tenants to remit taxes for their foreign landlords took off online. So obviously got the media attention, which actually brought it to their attention. So 𝐕𝐢𝐬𝐬, again, probably butchering his name as well, this has existed for nearly a century, and there's not a single instance of an assessment made to an individual tenant in the last decade, apparently up until now. In a statement to Global News on Friday, the CRA affirmed that it does not expect tenants to withhold 25% of rent to landlords. In most situations involving rental income, the CRA's practice is to engage with the landlord rather than the tenant. Seems like a pretty simple solution and what they should have done in the first place. The CRA added to ensure tax fairness, the CRA would engage directly with a tenant where there is a business relationship between the tenant and the landlord, adding that those are exceptional and rare circumstances. So the rest of the article just goes on to talk a little bit more about the situation, so I won't bore you with it. So it seems like the CRA finally ended up coming to their senses after drawing a ton of media attention that they probably didn't want in this situation at a time where Canada's already going through a housing crisis. And where they're continually trying to implement new laws to protect tenants, this obviously wasn't a good look. And it sounds like they did come to a solution and this guy's gonna end up getting off the hook. However, I haven't seen any final reports or outcomes stating that he's completely off scot-free. But I think it's safe to assume that they're probably gonna deal with it. So once again, this completely shocked me when it first came across my desk, and then I was able to look into it a little bit further and see that it seems like they have come to some sort of a solution. Because more often than not, I'm coming across articles similar to these stating that the landlord is having to pay this exorbitant amount of money because of the fact that they had a bad tenant in place that either ruined the property or wasn't paying rent. So it really shocked me when I saw that the headline was actually renter has to pay $43,000. But that's about enough for me. However, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this situation and what was going through your mind when you first heard about it. It's unfortunate that a lot of these situations seem like they need to actually be brought to the media to draw more attention to them. But sometimes it really feels like that might be the only way that they're going to be dealt with. However, the good news is that they do make for great video topics. If you liked today's video and you're interested in seeing more just like this one, as well as community tours across the Lower Mainland, I suggest you consider subscribing to our channel. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure you check out another video on our channel before you get out of here, and we'll see you in the next video.